Most people don't realize that while politicians debate immigration and trade policies, some of America's largest corporations are quietly executing one of the most significant business relocations in modern history. They're not moving to China for cheap labor or to Ireland for tax advantages. They're moving north to Canada. The reasons reveal fundamental problems with the American business environment that most people haven't even noticed yet. What if I told you that companies representing over $400 billion in market capitalization have either relocated major operations to Canada or announced plans to do so within the next 3 years, and that this migration is accelerating as American policy uncertainty, infrastructure failures, and regulatory chaos make the supposedly stable business environment south of the border increasingly unreliable? Today, we're going to examine why companies from Walmart to Microsoft, from major banks to cryptocurrency miners, are discovering that Canada offers something America can no longer guarantee: predictable costs, reliable infrastructure, and government policies based on long-term economic planning rather than short-term political theater. This is not about companies chasing subsidies or avoiding taxes. It's about fundamental business requirements that America is failing to provide, while Canada has turned these basic necessities into competitive advantages. For decades, the United States represented the gold standard for business-friendly environments. Political stability, rule of law, massive consumer markets, and world-class infrastructure made America the obvious choice for companies seeking to establish or expand operations. The phrase "made in America" carried weight not just as marketing, but as a guarantee of quality and reliability. But the business environment that attracted global investment for generations has been steadily eroding. Political polarization has made policy predictability impossible. Infrastructure built in the 1950s and 1960s is failing without adequate replacement. Regulatory frameworks change dramatically with each election cycle, making long-term planning nearly impossible. The energy sector provides perhaps the clearest example of this deterioration. American electricity costs have increased by 47% over the past decade, with some regions experiencing even steeper rises. Power grid reliability has decreased significantly, with rolling blackouts and brownouts becoming routine in states that once provided rock-solid electricity service. California, long considered the epicenter of American innovation, has implemented scheduled power outages affecting millions of customers. Texas experienced catastrophic grid failures during winter storms that left businesses without power for days. Even traditionally reliable regions like the Northeast face aging infrastructure that struggles to meet modern demand. Meanwhile, Canada has maintained electricity costs that are 60–70% lower than American averages while providing 99.9% reliability. The difference is not marginal. It's transformative for energy-intensive industries that form the backbone of modern manufacturing and technology. Consider the mathematics from a business perspective. A data center that might cost $2.3 million annually to operate in Virginia costs $890,000 to operate in Manitoba. A manufacturing facility that spends $1.8 million per year on electricity in Ohio spends $720,000 for the same power consumption in Quebec. These aren't rounding errors. They're the difference between profit and loss in competitive industries. The cryptocurrency mining industry illustrates this dynamic perfectly. Bitcoin and other cryptocurrency operations require enormous amounts of electricity to power the computer systems that process transactions. When China banned cryptocurrency mining in 2021, mining operations scattered to countries offering cheap, reliable power. Many initially established operations in Texas, attracted by deregulated energy markets and pro-business rhetoric, but the February 2021 winter storm that crashed the Texas power grid cost crypto miners over $50 million in lost revenue in just 4 days. The 2022 summer heat waves forced additional shutdowns as the grid struggled to meet air conditioning demand. Canadian provinces, by contrast, actively recruited cryptocurrency operations with offers of long-term power contracts at guaranteed rates. The result has been a massive migration of mining operations from American states to Canadian provinces, representing billions of dollars in investment and thousands of jobs. This pattern repeats across multiple industries. The semiconductor sector, facing massive expansion as global chip demand grows, requires both enormous amounts of electricity and ultra-pure water for manufacturing processes. American locations increasingly struggle to provide both simultaneously. Intel's planned expansion in Arizona faces water availability constraints that could limit production capacity. TSMC's facility in the same state has required expensive workarounds to ensure adequate water supply. Meanwhile, Canadian provinces offer abundant water resources and cheap hydroelectric power that make chip manufacturing more economically viable. The automotive industry represents another sector where Canadian advantages are becoming decisive. Modern car manufacturing depends on complex supply chains where components cross borders multiple times during production. American trade policies that impose tariffs on intermediate goods have made these supply chains more expensive and unpredictable. Ford has quietly shifted significant production capacity to its Canadian facilities, citing lower energy costs and more stable trade relationships. General Motors has announced major expansions in Ontario while scaling back some U.S. operations. These aren't temporary adjustments, they represent permanent shifts in industrial capacity. The most dramatic example involves Walmart, America's largest retailer. While the company has closed stores and distribution centers across the United States, it has simultaneously expanded Canadian operations, opening new facilities and hiring thousands of workers. The reasons are straightforward. Canadian operations generate higher profit margins due to lower energy costs, more predictable regulations, and supply chains free from arbitrary trade disruptions. While American operations struggle with tariff-induced costs and infrastructure bottlenecks, Canadian facilities operate with the efficiency that made Walmart successful. This corporate exodus isn't limited to traditional industries. The technology sector is increasingly establishing operations in Canadian cities like Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver. Microsoft announced a $1.3 billion investment in Quebec specifically for artificial intelligence development, citing cheap hydroelectric power. AI computational requirements are enormous, making electricity costs a primary location factor. Canadian facilities can operate AI research at a fraction of American costs. Google has expanded its Canadian operations significantly, citing both cost advantages and access to talent. The company's quantum computing research is increasingly centered in Waterloo, Ontario, where it can tap into both the University of Waterloo's expertise and Ontario's low-cost electricity grid. Even financial services, traditionally anchored to major American financial centers, are establishing significant Canadian operations. The reasons extend beyond cost savings to include political stability and regulatory predictability that American markets can no longer guarantee. Major international banks have moved trading operations to Montreal and Calgary to take advantage of low-latency connections to both New York and London financial markets. These facilities can execute the same transactions as American operations while benefiting from lower operational costs and more stable political environments. The cryptocurrency exchange Coinbase has established major operations in Canada while reducing its American footprint, citing regulatory uncertainty in the United States as a primary factor. Canadian financial regulators have provided clearer guidelines for cryptocurrency operations, allowing companies to plan long-term strategies rather than constantly adapting to changing American policies. The talent migration accompanying corporate moves represents perhaps the most significant long-term consequence. As companies establish Canadian operations, they attract skilled workers who prefer the political stability, healthcare systems, and quality of life Canadian cities offer. This brain drain affects senior executives, researchers, and entrepreneurs increasingly choosing Canadian opportunities. The reasons extend beyond business considerations to include concerns about American political polarization, infrastructure reliability, and social stability. Canadian immigration policies specifically target skilled workers in technology, finance, and advanced manufacturing, industries where American competitiveness is declining. This creates a virtuous cycle where corporate relocations attract talent, which attracts more investment, creating additional skilled worker opportunities. The scale of migration is visible in real estate markets. Toronto, Montreal, and Vancouver have experienced significant increases in high-end residential demand as American executives relocate permanently. Canadian universities report record applications from American students seeking alternatives to expensive and politically polarized American higher education. The energy advantages driving corporate migration represent structural changes likely to persist for decades. Canada's hydroelectric systems require minimal maintenance compared to complex fossil fuel or nuclear plants. Climate change actually increases water flow in many Canadian watersheds, improving hydroelectric capacity and reliability. American energy systems face mounting challenges. Aging nuclear plants require expensive upgrades. Coal plants are retiring without adequate replacement. Natural gas systems face supply vulnerabilities and price volatility, making long-term planning difficult. The regulatory environment differences have become equally significant. Canadian policies remain stable across election cycles because they are based on long-term economic planning rather than short-term political positioning. This stability allows confident business investment decisions about future operating conditions. American regulatory frameworks can change dramatically every 4 years. Environmental regulations, tax policies, trade rules, and immigration systems shift with presidential administrations, making consistent long-term business strategies impossible. The infrastructure reliability gap is widening. American infrastructure investment has declined as a GDP percentage for decades, while Canadian governments maintain consistent investment in roads, bridges, power grids, and telecommunications. The American Society of Civil Engineers gives U.S. infrastructure a C grade, noting that delays and inefficiencies cost businesses hundreds of billions annually. Canadian infrastructure maintains significantly higher reliability ratings across major categories. These infrastructure differences affect everything from shipping costs to internet reliability to maintaining operations during extreme weather. Businesses depending on consistent infrastructure performance increasingly find Canadian locations offer superior value. The healthcare cost differential represents another significant corporate location factor. American companies spend enormous amounts on employee health insurance, often 15-20% of total compensation. Canadian operations benefit from universal healthcare, eliminating these employer expenses. This healthcare advantage becomes significant for companies attracting skilled workers. Employees increasingly view comprehensive healthcare as basic requirement rather than luxury benefit. Canadian locations offer superior healthcare access at lower employer cost. The political stability factor cannot be overstated. American politics has become unpredictable, with dramatic policy changes based on elections. This uncertainty makes business planning difficult, particularly for industries requiring long-term investment commitments. Canadian politics tends toward incremental change rather than dramatic reversals. This stability allows businesses to make decade-long investment commitments with reasonable confidence about future operating conditions. The cumulative effect creates agglomeration effects, business concentrations that reinforce competitive advantages. As more technology companies establish Canadian operations, they attract suppliers, contractors, and service providers, making the entire ecosystem more efficient. Toronto's financial district increasingly rivals New York in international banking presence. Montreal's AI research cluster competes with Silicon Valley. Vancouver's film industry attracts productions that might otherwise locate in Los Angeles. These clusters create self-reinforcing investment and talent cycles that become difficult for American regions to compete with. The advantages compound over time rather than remaining static. The tax policy differences, while often exaggerated, provide additional corporate migration incentives. Canadian corporate rates are competitive with American rates, but the tax system is more predictable and less subject to sudden political changes. More importantly, Canadian tax policies support long-term investment in R&D activities. The scientific research and experimental development credit provides significant incentives for companies establishing Canadian research operations. American tax policies can change dramatically with each election cycle, making long-term financial planning difficult. The 2017 Tax Cuts and Jobs Act provided temporary advantages scheduled to expire, creating uncertainty about future tax obligations. The trade policy advantages have become significant as American trade relationships become volatile and unpredictable. Canadian companies benefit from stable trade agreements with both the U.S. and other major economies, providing global market access without sudden policy change risks. American companies face uncertainty about trade relationships that can change based on political rather than economic considerations. Tariffs, sanctions, and restrictions can be imposed with minimal notice, making international business planning challenging. Canadian operations provide insurance against American trade policy volatility. Companies can serve American markets from Canadian facilities while maintaining access to global supply chains and export markets that might be disrupted by American trade disputes. The environmental regulatory advantages represent another corporate relocation factor. Canadian environmental policies are consistent and predictable, allowing businesses to plan compliance strategies with confidence about future requirements. American environmental regulations can change dramatically with presidential administrations, creating significant compliance risks for long-term investments. Uncertainty about future policies makes it difficult to design facilities that will remain compliant over operational lifespans. The immigration policy differences have become significant for companies dependent on international talent. Canadian immigration systems are designed to attract skilled workers and process applications efficiently. American immigration policies have become restrictive and unpredictable, making international talent recruitment difficult. This immigration advantage becomes crucial for technology companies, financial services, and research organizations competing globally for talent. Canadian locations can attract and retain international workers more easily than American operations, facing visa restrictions and processing delays. The currency advantages also play a role in corporate decisions. The Canadian dollar typically trades at a discount to the US dollar, making Canadian operations less expensive in dollar terms. This differential can provide significant cost advantages for companies serving American markets from Canadian locations. The cultural and linguistic advantages cannot be ignored. Canada shares cultural similarities and language with the United States that make business operations seamless while providing regulatory and cost advantages of a different country. The quality of life factors increasingly influence corporate location decisions as companies compete for skilled workers who have global mobility. Canadian cities consistently rank higher than American cities in international quality of life surveys, making them more attractive for recruiting and retaining talent. These quality of life advantages include everything from healthcare access and education quality to crime rates and environmental conditions. For companies trying to attract the best global talent, Canadian locations provide compelling advantages over American alternatives. The long-term demographic trends favor Canadian business locations. Canada has younger demographics than the United States due to higher immigration rates and more effective integration of immigrant populations. This demographic advantage creates expanding consumer markets and growing labor forces. American demographics, by contrast, show aging populations and declining birth rates that create long-term challenges for economic growth. These demographic trends make Canadian markets more attractive for companies planning multi-decade investment strategies. The technological infrastructure advantages are becoming increasingly important as business operations become more dependent on digital connectivity. Canadian telecommunications infrastructure is more modern and reliable than American systems in many regions. This technological advantage becomes crucial for companies dependent on cloud computing, artificial intelligence, and other bandwidth-intensive operations. Canadian locations can provide superior technological infrastructure at lower cost than many American alternatives. The educational system advantages create long-term talent pipeline benefits for companies establishing Canadian operations. Canadian universities consistently rank among the world's best in engineering, computer science, and business programs that supply skilled workers for modern industries. American higher education, while still strong in absolute terms, faces mounting challenges including rising costs, political interference, and declining international enrollment. These trends threaten the talent pipeline that has historically supported American economic competitiveness. The measurement of corporate migration is still early, but trends are unmistakable. Corporate decisions made today will determine economic geography for decades. Companies choosing Canadian locations position themselves for long-term competitive advantages difficult for American-based competitors to match. The implications extend beyond individual corporate decisions. As more companies establish Canadian operations, they create economic momentum, attracting additional investment and talent. This momentum becomes self-reinforcing, creating economic clusters competing directly with traditional American business centers. The political implications in the United States are significant. As companies relocate operations and jobs to Canada, affected American communities will demand explanations and solutions from their elected representatives. The challenge is that many of the factors driving corporate migration, infrastructure decay, regulatory uncertainty, political polarization, require long-term solutions that are difficult to implement in the American political system. Canadian policymakers, meanwhile, are actively encouraging this migration through targeted incentives and policy frameworks designed to attract international investment. The success of these policies is creating a virtuous cycle that reinforces Canada's advantages over American locations. The transformation represents one of the most significant shifts in North American economic geography since the industrialization of the American South in the mid-20th century. Like that earlier transformation, this shift is driven by fundamental competitive advantages that create lasting changes in business location patterns. The companies making these moves are not motivated by short-term cost savings or temporary incentives. They are responding to structural advantages that make Canadian operations more profitable, reliable, and sustainable than American alternatives. These advantages are likely to persist and strengthen over time rather than diminish. The implications for American workers and communities are profound. As companies relocate operations, they take not just jobs, but entire industry ecosystems, including suppliers, contractors, and service providers. The multiplier effects of these relocations can transform entire regional economies. The brain drain aspects are particularly concerning for long-term American competitiveness. As skilled workers follow companies to Canadian locations, they take knowledge, expertise, and innovation capacity that is difficult to replace. This talent migration can create permanent disadvantages for American regions, losing key industries. The Canadian success in attracting American corporate investment represents a masterclass in economic development strategy. Rather than competing on subsidies or tax breaks, Canada has focused on providing the fundamental requirements that businesses need to operate efficiently: reliable infrastructure, predictable policies, and stable political environments. This approach creates sustainable competitive advantages rather than temporary incentives that can be matched by other locations. The businesses relocating to Canada are likely to remain there permanently because the underlying advantages that attracted them will continue to exist. The American response to this challenge will determine whether the corporate migration accelerates or stabilizes. Addressing the fundamental issues driving companies to relocate, infrastructure reliability, regulatory uncertainty, political instability, requires long-term commitments that extend beyond typical political cycles. Without such responses, the corporate exodus to Canada is likely to accelerate as more companies recognize the advantages that early movers have already discovered. The cumulative effect could represent one of the most significant peacetime transfers of economic capacity between allied nations in modern history. The quiet corporate migration from America to Canada represents more than just business location decisions. It reflects fundamental changes in the competitive advantages that determine where global economic activity locates in the 21st century. Canada has recognized and developed these advantages, while America has allowed its traditional strengths to erode. The companies making these moves are voting with their investments about where they believe the future of business success will be determined. Their decisions suggest that the economic balance in North America is shifting northward in ways that most observers have not yet recognized or acknowledged. Have you noticed changes in business activity or corporate presence in your region? Share your observations in the comments. Your local perspective helps illustrate the scope of this economic transformation.